No mai, haere mai. Welcome to the New Zealand Herald session, Central Auckland Reborn. I'm joined in this conversation today with three of the people who could be instrumental in making this happen. Frith Walker, who is the head of placemaking at Eke Panuku. Eke Panuku is the council agency that will be in charge of developments in Queen Street from July. Also Tania Loveridge, who is the head of advocacy and engagement at Heart of the City. Heart of the City is the business association for the central city. Tania's been in that role for quite a while, or been working for Heart of the City for quite a while, knows a lot about what we're going to be talking about. And Chlöe Swarbrick, who is the Auckland Central MP, again has been advocating strongly for development to speed up in the central city.
Yes. Kia ora.
So this is a Q&A. We are hoping that you will write in your questions and we will be doing our best to answer as many of them as possible over the next 40 minutes or so. I guess, team, that we would all agree that the central city, Auckland, ought to be a busy, vibrant place that people want to spend time in day and night. But we also know that there are issues ranging from crime and empty shops, empty offices, endless roadworks, changes to road use, rough sleepers, competition from elsewhere, lack of residential amenities, and a whole thing that's happening where a whole lot of people are talking the central city down and saying it's a terrible place now, and that feeds on itself. So what I wanted to do is ask each of you first, what you think the biggest problem facing central Auckland is. Can we start with you, Fred?
Answers are jostling in my head, but the one I'm choosing is human behaviour. Just because of the list you just gave us, people feeling safer working from home, not being able to come back, how people in the inner city who are residents are feeling at the moment, you know, people's ability to kind of bounce back. It's winter, the creature that we are as humans and how that is affecting our behaviour at this time would be my number one answer at the moment.
Okay, a hard one to solve.
Yeah.
And that's a
Tania.
very hard act to follow, because I probably would have described that in a slightly different way, but I probably relate. I was probably, you know, the people back is the, I guess, the biggest challenge in that we have an absence of people for a number of the reasons that you talk about, Simon. So I think, you know, if you solve a whole lot of those issues, then you probably get the people back, which is probably the
So can I tease that out just a little? What do you think is there a central barrier to getting the people back?
I guess there's a range of things. I mean, you know, the research that we do, safety is really a big barrier for people. Access is a big challenge. And I think that general transitional phase that we're in, we're certainly seeing people coming back into the office, but you know, we are a city built around lots of people. The tourists aren't back yet. So I feel like we're in this kind of transitional phase, but certainly what we hear is the safety and the access are things. But we also hear about the reasons why people want to come back, so we can talk to that. You know.
Just on that, is there an issue of people just preferring work from home?
Oh, I have no doubt that there'll be individuals who prefer to work from home. I mean, we're talking a lot with corporates who are, you know, they're really buying into the hybrid working. There's the 3 days a week seems to be quite the norm now. I for one, I can't stand working at home. I know that there's lots of people I talk to who don't want to be at home and they like to be in the office. And it's, you know, it's been quite fun actually in the last couple of weeks. We've been doing some quite cool events with corporates about who've been welcoming their teams back. You know, we literally facilitated a great Wynyard Quarter office shout where we had 2,500 people frequenting 9 bars on one night, and everyone was really loving just reconnecting. And we've just done some research and we've asked people, if you're no longer working in the city centre, what do you miss about it? And they're saying, I miss being back with my colleagues and I miss the buzz, I miss those opportunities to kind of be out and about.
Chloe, what's the biggest problem?
Well, firstly, I would say that I've got a bone to pick with the Herald and the way that you guys have framed this series that you've had for the past several days. I've consistently seen headlines framing this up as conversations about the CBD, that being the Central Business District. 40,000 people live here, including myself and I believe others on this panel. And to that effect, you know, when we are talking about this as an issue with the CBD, we're automatically prescribing the frame of the kinds of solutions that we can look at, those being solely around certain business needs. And I think that we can end up chasing our tail to that effect. So we need to, in fact, be thinking about how do we create places and spaces for people to enjoy.
Fair enough. It's not the CBD, it's the central city, it's the inner city, and it includes business. business, but also residents, visitors, tourists, all sorts of
So to your question, I think that the biggest issue is that we have a ton of awesome plans. We've got a ton of awesome vision, but we just not have been able to translate those plans from those signing ceremonies and those press releases and those celebrations into action. The City Centre Master Plan was signed off in 2012. We're 10 years down the track, and I think actually the focal point, it's Queen Street. You know, disruption is inevitable. There's a lot of great things that are going to be happening and that will be opening in the next few years. How do we utilise that inevitable disruption to do some really awesome things? You aren't going to be able to put cars through roadworks, but you can get people around them. So how do we activate that as effectively as possible?
Right. This, I think, is a good moment to go back to you, Frith. Eke Panuku, as I said before, is taking over will become the lead agency for Queen Street and Central City development. What's going to happen?
The very short answer is that we will implement the City Centre Master Plan. The longer version of that is that we will work with all the awesome people who are already trying and working on implementing the City Centre Master Plan. We need to, I think we're using the term servant leadership a lot in context of the lead agency role, that our job is to come in and bring the things that we know we bring as a regeneration agency, working in the vision, thinking about place-led, as Chlöe rightly said, and then working deeply, fiercely collaborating with everybody that's out there in the council machine, but also everybody external. How do we bring everybody together around this city and what it could be in the future?
I suppose what I'm really getting at is Eke Panuku has been nominated as the lead agency for some time now. Hasn't taken over yet, but in that time we haven't seen any new plans. We haven't seen any documents that tell us what's going to happen. We're going to implement the 2012 City Centre Master Plan. It's kind of an easy thing to say. I think what people are really looking forward to is what's it going to look like? What's the functionality going to be in those spaces?
Forgive me for that short, glib answer, but that feels like the crux of it is, as Chlöe rightly said, there's a lot of plans on shelves in the city. How do we make sure that document and all the mahi that went into it counts? Our initial phase was called Discovery, so we recognised that we needed, I think it was 6 months, to just get to know what we were walking into, learn who's already doing work, make sure that we're coming in a way that's supportive, but also bringing strength and resource where we need to. And then I believe we've got from now till December to work out that implementation plan. How do we? We've taken a long time to get here, eh? It's taken us, count the years, I don't know, 180, 500. So we need to take a little bit of time to figure out how we take the next step forward, I think. So there's
Chlöe, you took a deep breath.
I complete respect to Frith and the people within Eke Panuku, and there's some amazing people in council who've been trying to push this along for a really long time now, and Heart of the City has also been alongside all of that. But I do think that we have what some of my friends who are in the urban space very glibly call the business case industrial complex. That is, we like to do consultation to death. We have a plan that has immense support from the community. We can do these things. We just have to commit to it. And I think particularly with the disruption on Queen Street at the moment, there's the ability to do what they did at the start of the pandemic in Sydney with George Street, close a few blocks, consistently work with the people who are in that space and using that space, the businesses, the residents, those who visit it, and do some stuff, some exciting stuff. We're not the first city in the world to face these problems.
And I wanted to come back to that actually. Tania, Heart of the City has been very supportive of some parts of the City Centre Master Plan, not of others. I wonder if, okay, well I was going to ask you what you would say. Where is Heart of the City in relation to the existing plan?
Yeah, good. And look, I think the vision and the intention of the City Centre Master Plan, we've all bought into that. I think the biggest challenge for us is the implementation of it and the things that wrap around enabling a lot of that plan to be realised. And I think we've probably spoken at length about this in the past, Simon, things like loading and servicing. You know, how do we make sure a city functions through the change, but equally at the end of it. So it's very easy to make a beautiful render that we all buy into, and the concept of a people-led city is there. You know, we see it, we understand what it's doing done internationally, but when you can't get an elderly person dropped off where they need to be, or a courier company can't pick up the flowers, we need to make changes around that. And we have a high degree of frustration, as do our businesses, that we haven't done the things yet the innovations and the changes. So, you know, we need to see that over the coming year as the city intends to do a parking development management plan, that we really come together and we make those changes to enable the vision, because we can't function as a city, then we can't, it won't work. And we don't believe it can just happen to chance, because everyone has to make changes. If it's businesses making changes to, you know, shifting opening hours a little bit to accommodate something happening earlier, or if it's a courier van. But right now we're hearing from businesses saying we can't even get deliveries.
So, and that's something happening right now as well. And I think that that's where it's really important, again, that we have constantly, with this iterative kind of vision, everybody coming around the table and problem solving as it's happening. Because I think, again, one of the big problems we can end up with is just the stasis when nothing's happening, because understandably there are challenges and issues that are being faced, but those challenges and issues exist right now. How do we work through them while we're moving forward?
Indeed.
Absolutely.
There's something else that strikes me about that, though, that there are big issues and there are the detail, and the detail can confound the big issues. I understand that, but it strikes me a lot of the time the debates have gone down to the level of can the courier pick up the flowers, or can I get that delivery in my shop, which is you would think ought to be at the level of these are simple function things. They are not the big ideas. They are not the big planning ideas that we need. I went and did a count of traffic on Queen Street late last year, and if you took out the buses and if you took out the service and delivery vehicles, what you had left almost entirely were people driving around looking for a car park, which they didn't need to be doing because there are car park buildings away from Queen Street and close to it. But service and delivery isn't always going to be in a central city in Auckland or any other central city, isn't always going to be done with large vans.
No, we agree.
So apart from one company, where are the cargo e-bikes?
Yeah, well, and that's right. Quite
this is
excited.
something that's been talked about for years, but where are they?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think over the last 2 years, probably in thinking about investment and people's ability to invest in new product is probably not there. There's an exciting, Waka Kotahi have got an innovation fund at the moment, and freight is going to be one of them. So we'll be looking to try and leverage that funding and work quite collaboratively with some of the sector to try and make it. But it's about curbside, and it's about assessment of needs, and it's how we evolve. And we just don't want to get into a space where we make some decisions to change the street when we haven't thought about that function. So you're right, Simon, it's not necessarily the big stuff, it's actually the little things that kind of tend to make a difference.
We're starting to get questions coming in. The first one is, what practical steps can be taken to get people back to the central city? Chloe?
I think that it is all about our environment. I mean, if you're talking about, as you're
practical steps, what
practical steps? Quite frankly, shut down some of the blocks. Shut down some of the blocks to traffic and open them up for the people. Do exactly what they did in Sydney with George Street, and continue to work with people about what that experience is like, and innovate and continue to put out street furniture and activate those spaces. Again, this is the crux of the City Centre Master Plan. This disruption is already occurring. How do we utilise that disruption as an opportunity as opposed to something which is a barrier?
Frith Eke Panuku must be talking a lot about what practical steps can be taken.
Yep. The line that I feel fond of extremely is that we want to tell the good story of the city centre as well as make sure that the city centre has a good story. So we're taking a cross-everybody approach, and thank you, Tania, for all of your work alongside us in this. So thinking about getting the basics right, safety, maintenance, cleaning, accessibility, those things. Don't want to steal your thunder, Tania, but gigs like City of Colour, what are the kind of events that will draw people back? Said by one of the wonderful developers in the city centre that getting workers back is actually a change process. We've spent a couple of years telling ourselves we need to be at home, so we can't just tell people to come back. That won't work all the time or for everybody. People who've discovered their neighbourhood or that working from home with their kids is way better, them coming back is a different kind of choice. So thinking about the tertiary sector, how they fit into this, and as everybody's rightly said, the residents, the people that live here all the time. I'm one too. So this there's a list. We did a bit of research and came up with that big list, and there are people working against all of those items now to work as fast as we can to recover, but also keep that eye on the future at the same time.
Question of working from home.
Yeah.
When we say, well, people are going to come back, but they're going to come back only 3 days a week or whatever, there's a glass half empty or half full way of looking at that. But actually, if people are only in the central city for 60% of the time they used to be in, they effectively haven't come back for, as far as any retail is concerned. they lose 40% of their trade because of that, they're in serious trouble. So,
yeah, well, absolutely. And I think if we look at our pedestrian counts at the moment, they're around 55% of what they were back in 2019. Spend is up to 75% of 2019. So I think if we look at that and think, where's the gap? What are the opportunities there? But absolutely, Simon. And I guess over time, we're still extremely confident that the city centre is a place that businesses want to locate. And, you know, we hear that. We know that things like safety are barriers at the moment for some commercial properties to be leased in certain areas of the city, but confident that people want to, you know, it's agglomeration, it's a knowledge spillover, people do want to come. So perhaps if people are going to have to downsize, then that creates more space for someone else to move in. That might take time, Simon, but that vibrancy piece, I think, is extremely important.
Yep.
So if we get those 3 days of people in the office and they stay there after work and they go and invest and spend money, that's what we need. That's the opportunity.
And then they go and tell stories. I went in, I had a lovely time.
So, you know, they can be into town in 5 days a week and they could be going home at lunch, you know, after the end of the day or not going out at lunchtime. But imagine if those 3 days after work, you know, we've got Matariki Ki Te Manawa coming up next week. That's about celebrating a whole lot of, you know, for good reason, Tau Māori in the city centre, and we've got Queen Street's activated, we've got Aotea Square, we've got reasons that people will hopefully want to go out and stay. And so it's about planning your week. I mean, vibrancy is really, really important.
Yeah, but if I may also, just jumping in on that, I think it is also really important to recognise that this working from home trend is something that preceded COVID. Absolutely, COVID sped it up, but I don't think that we can have a rose-tinted view of what used to exist and think that we're somehow going to go back to that. We have to figure out what it looks like to have the city centre as a destination, not as a thoroughfare or as an incidental, that people just happen to be here because that's where the office blocks are. And that again, I think, is about harnessing the power of our small businesses and our holes in the wall and our eateries and those who want to showcase that innovation. Again, Simon, you yourself went down Queen Street and did a count of the empty shops, and I believe was it around 40 odd?
Yeah, around 40.
17.
Yeah.
Actually, Simon.
Oh, way down.
Yeah, and to that effect, I think, you know, speaking to a number of commercial landlords and also the banks who hold their commercial mortgages, it's the case that there is this really odd standoff that's occurring where some people are quite happy to hold their rents really high and not have these short-term, potentially peppercorn leases, which again leads to a sense of places that people can go out and explore and engage with, and that ticks over to more and more people doing and going out and enjoying these places and spaces.
It strikes me that that's one of the central issues that we need to address as a city, that we will need new uses for some of the office space, we will need new uses for some of the shop space. There will never be full rows of shops in the way we used to have them, and the offices will never be full of offices again in the way they were. Is that a challenge for Eke Panuku? Is that something you guys are looking at?
I mean, I say opportunity, and I think we need processes that, as you rightly said, Chloe, we need processes that help us being innovative. But we also need to make sure we're making a city centre that everyone has permission to come and engage in. So, what are the opportunities to bring in different kind of economies, innovative uses? For, you know, that conversation around empty. Sorry, this is a big one to say out loud, but empty office blocks, housing, potentially inner city gardens. You know, that's the space. The city is. There's this great quote around cities that they are hubs for innovation. So this is a moment for innovation for the city. And yeah, I think there's so many people out there who are clever and invested in this conversation that we can
So there are
enable.
really difficult issues for landowners, for landlords in offices and retail, that they don't want to destroy the value of their properties. They don't want to invest heavily in something that might not work. You know, it's difficult to convert offices to apartments. You'd think it would be easy, but actually it's not. It's hard to do. So there needs to be a coordinated approach, government, council,
Some
private
incentives.
sector, and some incentives, and maybe a bit of encouragement.
I mean, look at the cab.
As well.
You know, the cab's about to get practical completion, and what a wonderful conversion from commercial to
Takes a while, though,
residential.
doesn't it?
It does
Takes
take a while. I mean, even the
do it
international
as-
up the road. You know, like that's a. I mean, there's obviously different scales and qualities, but you know,
But in
celebrate
terms of-
celebrate those developers who have taken the
I want to
chance.
move along because there are a whole lot of subjects. We have a question here. What are you going to do about all the homeless people everywhere in the CBD?
Well,
You might like to pick apart that.
So firstly, the CBD, we're talking about the city centre, and again, when we're talking about really innovating in a place that people want to come to, then we are talking about the city centre, because when you design streets for people, then you have meaningful meandering and all of that incidental spending and curiosity and experience of the city centre, which is actually great for our small businesses. So all of the homeless, Yeah, probably important to start at the point of what is it that we want to do as a society when we're talking about those who are unhoused. Right now it is the case that many people end up congregating in the city centre because that's where the services are. And it's also where you can have lighting 24/7 and sure, not a huge amount of security, let alone privacy, but there is slightly more than you may get in the likes of the suburbs, for example. So what are we going to do about that? Well, we have to actually grapple with the reality that we have the highest rates of wealth inequality in this country that we have had since records began. We have to deal with the housing crisis and we have to build more homes. We also have to provide wraparound services for those who are currently in transitional and emergency housing. I have letter after letter after letter that I could show you, writing to, for example, Minister Little, asking for more support from the Ministry of Health for this kind of stuff, and we simply haven't seen the resourcing coming through.
Helen Robinson, who is the City Missioner, was in the paper on Sunday, suggesting that, as far as she could see, the number of rough sleepers hasn't really risen in the city, but they are more obvious because there are fewer other people, and also for the fact, as you mentioned, Chloe, that this is the place where people come, the services are here, and actually there are something, I believe, around about 1,000 people who are housed, homeless people who have temporary or assisted housing in the central city. So they're not going to stay in their rooms all day, they're going to come out. So that's a reality of being a big city, if you like. But what's your perception, Tania?
Yeah, well, I mean, and it is interesting. I guess one of the things that we've found is that people sometimes don't have anything to do during the day, and so they will be spending time. So, you know, a few years ago we implemented an positive alternative to begging, which was Street Guardians. So that's back up and running. It had to take a pause through COVID, and understandably with Omicron, but it's back up to 2 days a week.
Can you explain Street Guardians?
So Street Guardians is effectively an alternative sort of work program for people in the city. So on any 2 days a week, up to 12 people a day, given an opportunity to go out and do some voluntary work at voluntary organisations, whether it be planting trees or fixing something up at the tipping point out west. So it's about saying, hang on a minute, we recognise that you're part of this community, but you want something to do, we'll provide that opportunity. And we are currently in discussions as to how we can grow that up to 5 days. It will need some funding, but that will provide more opportunities for more people to actually be on the street. So sometimes that's the situation that we're facing.
I was going to say, my understanding is that Street Guardians, sometimes that allows those people to move into work as well.
Yeah,
there are people
absolutely.
they work for as a volunteer who can then
Yeah,
take
and
them
recognising that we are dealing with people who are vulnerable and have higher needs, so it's not necessarily always a pathway to work, but it wasn't intended to be, but we have seen that. And I guess it's part of a really important ecosystem, and now with Homeground opening as well, there'll be more activities, and it's closer to the city. I think the temporary mission being over in Union Street was quite far away, so I guess the hope is that we'll see more people engaging with the mission services now that they're closer as well.
Yeah, and that's on Hobson Street,
Yeah.
And what the mission will say is that we shouldn't really say homeless people, we should say people who are homeless. And what the point they're making is many people who are homeless are not, that's not how you would describe them as a permanent state.
No.
It will be a transitional state.
Well, you
It won't be
talked
true
to
for all, but it will be true for many. So the idea of thinking about people as being able to move through, but as you say also, these are vulnerable people. These are mostly people who've been through appalling trauma. These are people who have real issues to face and need support for that. But it is well, I was going to say it is for many a transition.
Yeah. The emergency housing has been a real challenge in the city centre, and I guess, you know, we were talking about this just before. People are put into places where you don't have the wraparound services, and so you've got, it's not great for anybody really, where you're put into kind of a fairly foreign living environment, and then you
if your whole life you've been let down by system after system after system, and you've been ripped out of situation after situation, and then all of a sudden you're put up in an apartment and you don't know how long for, and you don't have access to those wraparound services, and you don't know what to do to occupy you throughout the day, of course you're not going to engage in that as though it is a place to put down roots, as though it's a place to build and foster that sense of community. So I think the other missing part of this is actually conversations with those who are experiencing precisely this. And there's actually been some phenomenal work by the likes of Awhina Mai Tātou Katoa or AMTK, which operate out the back of Pitt Street Methodist Church, who did this survey of those who occupy the streets during the day. And guess what? They want something to do during the day. They want a space to make kai, to engage with their extended whānau, and to connect up to services. These problems, again, are completely solvable.
I wonder if we could move to the different issue of crime, which is not the same issue as
No, it's not.
homelessness, but different. It strikes me that there are different sorts of crime issues that the central city is confronting at the moment. One of them is theft, which might escalate up to ram raids, but they tend to be out in the suburbs, tend to be different parts. One of them is the problem that the central city has always had, which is drunken people behaving badly late at night. One of them is that there is some gang activity related to drugs and violence and so on. How big of an issue is this now? Tania?
Well, I guess, if you look at crime stats have gone up, and I guess we do consider it to be an issue. I think regionally we're also facing a major problem regionally, so I think it's always really important to put what's happening in the city centre into context of the regional challenges. This is not unique to the city centre. It was really pleasing to read, as part of this series, that the police are going to put a central office to recognising that they do need to put more resource into the city centre, and police presence goes a long way in making people feel safe walking along the street. It's the mellow yellow, which if everybody, not yellow mellow, if everyone's in high-vis vests and the police around, people do feel naturally safer. So it's enough of an issue, Simon, that we need to address it, and we need to come together, and there's a lot of really good collaboration and good response locally around what has to be done from a safety and security perspective.
Would you argue that it's not being addressed, or that it is being addressed?
I think it is being addressed. We would like to see more police on the street.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, you speak to Gray Anderson, who's our area commander out of the College Hill station, and he'll be amongst all of those on the front line the first to tell you that the police quite frequently are actually not able to prevent that crime necessarily. They are turning up at the point at which the crime has occurred. So how do we actually, again, build systems and resiliency in order to prevent that crime? So again, this goes back to the heart of this inequality problem. If we were solely looking at police as the solution to this, which is not at all what Heart of the City is saying, and I don't want to misrepresent them, but if you were solely looking at police as the solution to this issue, then the likes of America would be amongst the safest places on the planet, and it's not. You end up with the self-fulfilling prophecy, I think, if we're solely focusing on crime as a symptom as opposed to inequality and some of the other issues that may lead to this, and instead if we focus on what is causing this crime and how do we prevent it, how do we have safer communities, which actually is all about neighbours knowing each other, and in turn again investing in that sense of putting down roots and building a community, then in turn you have far greater outcomes.
So more police on the streets, but also those
and the likes of the Māori Wardens, actually. If you speak to the Māori Wardens, or if you go out with them, you'll see the rapport that they have with particularly members of our community, like those who are without homes, which doesn't necessarily exist for somebody who's wearing another uniform.
Moving along, question for you, Frith. I live next to the tunnel being built on Albert Street. How long is that going to be before it finishes? And I think the question really there, the answer is we think 2024.
End of 2024.
That's right. They haven't. It was going to be 2023. It's not going to be 2023. They haven't announced yet, but probably 2024 end.
Yeah, that's the current.
With fingers crossed. But the question's a bigger question. The question is, the roadworks are an ongoing disruption, and they so often appear to be far more disruptive than they need to be. Frith, is Eke Panuku going to make them less disruptive?
I wish I had a magic wand. And I sort of want to, forgive me, resident out there, I want to say the city, we have to sort of appreciate that the city is never finished. The city will always evolve, it will always have change. But back to something you said at the beginning, Chlöe, we need to be talking to people really well. We need to, on the one hand, understand why these works are happening, make sure that we're communicating really well with local residents on how long it's going to be and consistently communicating. And then also making sure we're telling the story of why is it happening, the positive thing that will happen as a result. So I appreciate that we could have done a much better job with the works in Albert Street, and I am very grateful to all those residents and businesses for their patience.
Do you think the City Rail Link Limited, that organisation, which is part government, part council, which is building the City Rail Link, do you think they appreciate that they got Albert Street wrong?
I don't know. I wouldn't feel comfortable answering that, Simon. I haven't had a chat to them. But I think we always know we can do better. We're learning, we're failing, we're learning, we're failing. I think this is the big thing we need, especially for City Council, is we need to do a better job of coming in. I think you said it, Chloe, the word iterative it really terrifies some people, but actually we need to take an iterative approach right now because we're learning as we're doing. And so I think we can always admit we can do better and learn from that. But I will now hand to my friend Tania and see if she'd like to answer Simon's question differently.
I think so. I think yeah, I think so. I think it's everyone, we would all agree that it hasn't been done well, and obviously, we've had to fight pretty hard to get that hardship fund in place, which is going some way, but not the full way in addressing the severity of impact that those poor people are facing. This should be the best project being done in New Zealand, and we, should be looking towards it to say, that's how you do it.
But the getting there is
there is many ways in which you can do it better. And with Midtown knocking on the door with Victoria Street, it has to be done better. And given the other challenges that we've been speaking about today, construction in a pre-COVID world was hard enough, but in a kind of current post-COVID world, it's even going to be harder.
Because Frith's right, isn't she? That we'll always have construction disruption because it's a growing city and there's lots to do. So we need really good ways of managing it that are not so disruptive.
And there's the management, but there's also
penalising for businesses and every other pedestrian.
Plus it's the invest in the businesses to sort of support them through that as well. And I think one of the things that I often talk to is people just never anticipated how severe it would be. And so it's actually been really warts and all, as far as, which is it's a hard thing to say as a city because that's acknowledging that it's going to be painful, but people really need to understand, and then there needs to be the support in place to help them get through, because we don't want them to be the victims of this kind of this transformation.
I want to ask about something that I've written about and is dear to my heart, and it's the idea that for a place like Auckland Central City to thrive once again, it can't just incrementally get back to what it was or get back to some better version of that. It's got to have a big idea. It's got to have, why would people want to come and visit Auckland now? And there are lots of ways in which you solve that question of a big idea, and it somehow has to be solved in a way that isn't too disruptive in getting there, but at the same time, if we want Auckland to be special enough that it becomes once more a gleaming jewel, or however you want to imagine it,
Tamaki Makaurau?
It's going to need Tamaki Makaurau is going to need something wonderful.
We're going to need a sense of identity back, and I think that has to be really consciously developed and invested in. We are the biggest city in this country by a country mile, and when I talk to a bunch of my mates, I'm constantly lobbying to move to Auckland Central City, because it also happens to be one of the only places in the country where we've got new high quality apartments coming online. Rents were going down for a while, and there's the opportunity to bed in here and to do something, to commit to our city being awesome and to be part of that. So, when you ask people from outside of Auckland to think about Auckland and what they envision when they're thinking of our central city in particular, they'll often tell you the Sky Tower and traffic jams. I think if you ask Aucklanders, they might tell you about beaches, they might tell you as well about the Sky Tower, but when you ask them to think about the hub of our central city and the symbol of places like Queen Street, it is not currently reflecting us. And that again is where I think it is really important that we have that responsibility again on those landlords, on the community, and on all of us to start to bed in that vibrancy which is so necessary. And these again are not new challenges that not only Auckland or this country hasn't faced before, but this is the likes of stuff which the group out of Christchurch, Gap Filler, came along just after the earthquake, started working across council and across these businesses and started filling those spaces. We can do it.
So Gap Filler solutions would work in Auckland, but they're temporary, aren't they?
Yeah,
one of the extraordinary things about Auckland internationally is that when you go to most cities in the world and you have a day, you go to the centre of the city, because that's where the really extraordinary things are that make that city special. You go to Paris and you don't even know what it's like apart from the centre if you've only got a day or two. In Auckland, if people have a day, they go to Waiheke. If they have 2 or 3 days, they will spend some time in the centre, and they'll go up to the Sky Tower and they'll go to the art gallery as the next most popular destination. And that tells you something about what we don't have here yet, to me. Day one ought to be the centre, like every other city, and day two is when you go to Waiaki. Tania, how do the city's view of the big thing we need? Do we need a big thing? Do we need something special, that special?
Probably don't have a really clear position. I was just thinking about bringing my children just get so excited about getting to get into the city every time. You know, I brought my daughter in on Saturday, and it's
Those
a
are
highlight.
stories to tell.
You
Keep
know,
telling,
like
aren't
they
Yeah.
absolutely adore it. And what were the things that she loved and engaged with? It was the public art. She stopped in front of one of our beautiful artworks on our empty tenancy, and can I have a photo? And so I'm avoiding the question, but I think it's about just, you know, those experiences. And we know the waterfront. People love the waterfront, you know, and what Wynyard Quarter has become, and I guess in the dining. And so I actually think that kind of some of the parts, and with a really strong narrative, can be strong enough, because everyone has got different things that they resonate with and love. You know, there will be someone who wants to go to Weta Workshop and then dine out at Depot because that's the thing they've been hanging out to do, but then there'll be someone else who wants to go to a gig at Spark Arena. And let's not forget the importance of those major events. You know, as the Civics got their sort of reopening in the 1st of July, and there will be hundreds of people coming in for that, and that will be their experience. So I think, Simon, there are lots of great things, and Melbourne's just having a conversation at the moment called Marvellous Melbourne, and I think that's wonderful. Yeah. So if we start to think about all these things that are marvellous and wonderful about the city centre, what else? There'll be like attractions. You know, the Sky Tower's just got some new attraction where you can do the sky. Is it called the Sky Slide?
Sky Slide.
You can kind of, you know. So I think it's just about looking for all those opportunities.
Better marketing, you think? It's more than that, though, isn't it?
Well, it is. We're about, you know, the Headland Park. What's going to happen there?
So, Eke Panuku, there's no. You've told us that the plan is to implement the 2012 City Centre Master Plan. That's not a big idea plan. It's a make the city functional plan. Is Eke Panuku thinking bigger as well?
I wouldn't say in isolation, so no, because we need to think with everybody else. Everything we've been talking about today, it has to be, whatever we do with the city centre has to be something that works for everyone. I'd love to minorly correct you at the beginning of this question, which is it has to be a place that people want to visit. It also has to be a place that people want to live. Yes. And we have to make more space for people to choose to live there and have the ability to choose to live there. I think Frith's answer to you is walkable. We have to make a place that's recognisingly Tamaki Makaurau, and we have to make a place that's walkable. If I can go placemaking nerd on you for a second, if you look up Project for Public Spaces and look at the power of 10, that talks about, you can choose a number between 0 and 10, but you know, every place needs multiple reasons to be there, and I think we want to make a place where people want to stay. So I keep saying the same words, we need to make a place. Okay,
so I want to ask you that a little more specifically.
Yes.
You've been heavily involved yourself with the development of Wynyard Quarter.
Yep.
Wynyard Quarter in many ways is a model of how good you can make an inner city space just to be in, you know, particularly Daldie Street and North Wharf and so on. Is that quality of urban design going to be applied to Queen Street?
I think this is part of the reason we are coming in as lead agency, so that we can bring some learnings from places like the waterfront. I personally believe that quality urban design should be able to be applied everywhere. Not everybody has to have bluestone, so price of thing you're buying can be relative to whatever needs to be for the place. But quality urban design, I think, is pretty jolly basic in terms of making a place that's good for human beings and a place that therefore people will want to stay. So I think this is one of our jobs, is come in alongside those teams that are working on now and think about into the future, what can we do that'll make that place resilient for the long term. We haven't said this yet, eh? We know the city centre's not resilient right now, and we have to make a place that's resilient. Human beings wanting to be in that place is the number one thing we can do to help it be resilient, and good urban design is pretty critical.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, and I mean, I think the transformation to date has, in theory, been driven by that quality design. I guess there's been challenges along the way, and the level of investment that council have made in people.
My feeling about it is that very often in Auckland we seek a solution that will be a compromise, a consensus solution, and we go down to do it. Go down there and find the thing that everybody is sort of basically agrees, and all it does is make everybody unhappy. Yep. That's where we find the solutions we'll all agree on. The consensus is in the great ideas, not in the mediocre ones. And so that's on you guys and on everybody else, to be supportive of that thinking, isn't it?
And I think you both said it, but people are saying that they quite like change, but they don't want their world to change. So some of this might be about being super brave and going, we we have, I wrote a note for myself, we have to believe that change is possible, and then we have to tell ourselves stories about that wonderful future that we're working towards. But you're absolutely right, if we make everybody happy, we might make cottage cheese, and we don't want to make cottage cheese. And this is one of the beauties of the waterfront, is we were able to, vision and lead, and what we've got down there has been extremely carefully put together by a lot of hands working in deep collaboration. You feel that in the place, right? You know when a place is cared for. Yeah. And so we've had the Wynyard Quarters had some terrible security things going on. We're working with the residents on all of that. The answer is, how do we come together and work on a solution together? That's everywhere, from the design right through to the project delivery, right through to the place management. How do we work together and hold this place together that's my big idea.
I'm going to wrap up in a minute or two, but just sort of in the end, I guess. One of the things that I know is that what's happening in Auckland isn't uncommon. There are cities all through America, North America, all through Europe and in Australia that are facing exactly the same issues of central city crime, the lack of people coming back to offices, shops closing, all of these things. It's a post-COVID. COVID has made it all worse, if you like. It's a phenomenon now that we have to rethink how central cities operate. Have you seen anything anywhere, Chlöe, in your reading and looking at this, where you go, wow, we should do that?
I think that I've been banging on about it constantly throughout this panel, actually, which is just across the ditch. In Australia, in Sydney, at the start of the pandemic, they made the decision to shut 4,500 square metres of George Street, which is really similar to Queen Street in a number of ways. It is the address of a number of the skyscrapers and the corporate buildings. It is 3 kilometres long, identical length to Queen Street, and they closed these blocks, and what they found first and foremost was actually that people weren't enjoying that street space. And then they went and asked people why they weren't enjoying that street space, and people said, well, we don't know what's going on, it looks like roadworks. So then they started to fill the space with street furniture and with activations, and hey presto, people started using it. I think that that's got to be the thinking that we're using. We have to commit to ideas, we have to take some risks, but we also have to be willing to change or to pivot when those plans are not necessarily playing out in the way that we expect them to, which is human-centred, pedestrian-centred design.
Thank you. Tania?
I was just thinking about Sydney, because I was reading that their nighttime economy has come back really strong, but their daytime is still struggling, so it'll be interesting to really unpick the relative kind of success of George Street or not at the moment, I guess, because I guess if we think about the number of the people populating the city, we can have big vacuous spaces and they're not populated, and then they might not be so good. So there's a bit of a chicken and egg in happening there. I mean, I really think that we just need to keep going, and I think we need to keep collaborating on bringing the sort of the vibrancy back. Like we talked about those public space events and activations. They feel good and they make people feel good. And that's what we're seeing. Melbourne, I think, has done a phenomenal job through COVID. They've done great initiatives to try and bring people back in through incentives. That we tried really hard to get some of those vouchers. We got the vouchers for accommodation and all sort of attractions, but not the dining. And they are celebrating their major events. They're celebrating every time someone comes back in and buying people free coffee. So I think it comes back to that comment on sort of the sum of the parts. I think it's a whole lot of things, Simon, that actually marry up to make it better, rather than necessarily the kind of,
Any last word? Frith?
Amsterdam, I think in 2020, leapt on donut economics and made a regenerative economic plan for their city. And I think if that's, as much as we need to hold the people that are suffering now and make sure we're leaping on the problems that need solving, we need to make sure that our city provides a right and the room for everybody to participate going towards. So that would be my hope, that we can think big in that system change space and make a Tamaki Makaurau for real in our city centre.
Thank you, Frith Walker and Tania Loveridge and Chlöe Swarbrick. That's us. Thank you all for viewing.